hi everyone. Yes, welcome to this session about things to think about when it comes to managing money as a couple. And it's very appropriately timed with Valentine's Day just 2 days away. But before we begin, just a few introductions for anyone who hasn't attended one of these sessions before. So firstly, my name is Amy Staines and I'm the Senior Financial Education Manager at Better With Money. And Better With Money is an independent financial education company, and it's our mission to really bring money and personal finance to life in a way that's interesting and easy to understand as well. There are also just a couple of housekeeping points to go through. So first of all, today's webinar is providing information only, so I won't be providing any sort of financial advice, but instead I'm hoping to give you the tools and knowledge to make your own decisions when it comes to your money. Now, Better With Money is also an independent financial education company. So we're not linked to any of the organisations or websites I might mention as we go through the session. So we have no financial incentive to point you in their direction. We just genuinely believe they offer useful tools and information which you can take advantage of. And as you already know, the session is being recorded and there will be time for Q&A at the end. So let's get started and take a look at the agenda. And we are going to start by setting the scene and looking at some of these challenges couples might face when it comes to money. We're then going to go through various strategies and considerations for managing your finances together as a couple. And we're also going to look at the gender pension gap and consider why it's really important. And we're then going to go through some top tips, and that will hopefully act as a bit of an action plan, which you can take away and work through after the session. And of course, that Q&A at the end. So let's start by setting the scene then and thinking about couples and money. We know that finances can be a huge cause of stress for people generally, but there is also this strong link between finance and romance, because money issues can cause real challenges in relationships. And in fact, they are often cited as one of the main reasons for getting divorced in the UK. And even if they don't lead to divorce, the majority of couples do actually argue about money. But what are some of these specific challenges that couples might face? Now, there are lots of different areas of finance that may cause friction in relationships, but let's just take a look at some of the common ones, which we can see on the slide here. So first of all, partners might not see eye to eye when it comes to their financial goals. Some people might prefer to live in the moment. Other people might prefer to save and plan for that financially secure future. And this in itself can actually be partly down to our individual attitudes towards money. And these are different for everyone. And research does show that our money mindset is actually formed by the age of 7. And these money attitudes can become really quite deeply ingrained. So, for example, some people develop a fear of credit. They might not like thinking about money in general, whilst others might see money as a useful tool to help them achieve their goals. And we know that finance can be an emotional topic at the best of times, but when money mindsets collide within partnerships, this is where relationships can run into problems, because it can create this tension and this friction, particularly when it comes to setting out financial goals for the future. But moving on to the next point, according to Royal London, a third of people feel like they are incompatible with their partner when it comes to saving and spending. And almost a quarter of people consider their partner to be irresponsible with money. And one of the most common causes of arguments about money in relationships is where spending habits are vastly different. So perhaps where one person is a lavish spender, one person is more conservative and mindful when it comes to their spending. But it's not just spending, because actually different incomes can also cause tension. Perhaps where one person earns a lot more than the other, and that lower earner may feel that they don't have the same control or the same say over financial decisions as a result. But moving on to the next point, a lack of communication about money is also a key challenge. And in our experience, most couples do often manage to sort out things like bills, mortgages, rent, council tax without too many problems. They'll either split them 50-50, or if they earn different amounts, they might agree who pays what. We will come on to talk about that more in a few minutes' time. But where couples tend to run into trouble is the less obvious spending, particularly when it comes to children. So, for example, who pays for the football subs or the swimming lessons? What about the ballet shoes and the school trips? And if one person feels like they're unreasonably contributing more to family finances than the other, that person might not even realize this. This is actually when we can start to see resentment building and arguments starting, but it often comes back down to that lack of communication. So the more we can communicate about money, the better. It's not always easy because as a nation, we do tend to bury our heads in the sand. We don't really like talking about money, and it's not a dinner table conversation in the same way it is in some other countries. And people are generally quite private about money, so it can be a difficult thing to talk about, but communication really is key, and we will look at that more on the next slide. But the final point here is around financial infidelity, which relates to money secrets between partners. And according to research from Starling Bank, almost a quarter of married couples and 30% of people in committed relationships are actually keeping a financial secret from their partner. So that might involve hiding debt, having a secret savings account, perhaps. Some people might keep quiet about whether they own any property. They might be secretive about money they've lost through, say, failed investments or gambling. But as you might imagine, these money secrets can quickly cause mistrust and arguments as well. So we can see here that there are various challenges when it comes to money in relationships, but fortunately, there are lots of strategies you can use to help. So that's what I'd like to go through now. And this begins with that communication point, because we've already seen that a lack of communication can cause problems. So first things first, try to talk about money with your partner. And this might feel strange at first, but if you can try to put some time aside periodically to discuss where your money is up to, this can be really valuable. And there is a really fantastic guide about talking to your partner about money on the Money Helper website. And I've linked that on the slide here. So definitely worth a look on there if you'd like a few pointers around how to start that conversation. But once you have started the conversation, it's then about setting joint financial goals over the short, next 5 years, medium, 5 to 10 years, and longer term, so 10 or more years away. Because joint financial goals can really help you feel like more of a team when it comes to managing your money. And money will also hopefully start to feel like more of a shared responsibility. It might feel more exciting because setting these goals can help money become seen as this tool to help you achieve the milestones you've discussed together. So, for example, perhaps you're looking to build an emergency fund as a couple, or buy a property together, or start a family. Really trying to understand and identify what you're working towards can add a really useful purpose to your money and give you something tangible to focus on together. And working towards these goals will also require you to plan your budget together. So you'll need to know what you're bringing in and what you're spending to be able to identify how much money you have left over at the end of the month to save towards those goals. And if, having completed your budget, you realize that you don't have any surplus, then it's about jointly considering whether there are any areas of expenditure that you can perhaps cut back on to free up income that then can be used towards other things. And part of this exercise means thinking about those expenses that only happen once a year. So things like the car service or MOT, celebrations like birthdays, and also factoring in any expenditure relating to any debt you have. So whether that's in sole names or joint names. And again, to help with this point, there are loads of budgeting tools out there. And there are planners on the Better With Money website as well, which I've linked there, and you can access those for free under our employee resources section. But having completed that budget, it's then about setting some ground rules. And this can include various different things. So, for example, how will you go about jointly managing your money on a day-to-day basis? So those day-to-day money tasks, they are often divided without you even realizing, but it is worth clarifying who's responsible for what. And it might also include another discussion on how you want to split household bills. as we've already alluded to, this can be particularly relevant where one party perhaps earns more than the other. So are you going to split those 50-50? Are they going to be proportionately split based on your income? And another area to think about is how you make financial decisions. And just to share an example of this, so I recently spoke to one couple who said they actually consult on any purchase they make, which is more than £50 in value. So whether that's a sole purchase or a joint purchase, that's one of the ground rules that they as a couple set between them. Now, you don't necessarily have to make every single financial decision together, but also you can if you want to. It's simply about making sure you're both involved and you're both clear on each other's expectations and preferences. But once you've then set those ground rules, you can then consider whether you're going to use sole or joint accounts or both. Now, this is quite a practical point, but it's really important to remember that having joint accounts, or indeed joint mortgages or joint loans, does mean that you become financially linked to someone else. And that means their credit history can then start to impact on yours. And in fact, in some cases, you might not be able to get mortgages or car finance or even phone finance because of your partner's credit rating, even if you're only applying in one name. So this is a really important point, thinking about how you are actually going to manage your money. So I'm going to expand on that a bit more on the next slide, looking at a few ideas of how you might combine your finances. So this really involves a discussion around different types of bank accounts, so joint and sole. So I've listed 3 broad options on this slide, and just to kind of pose a few questions before we dive into those more. So do you just have individual accounts? Do you put all of your money into one joint account, or do you use a mixture of both to manage bills and personal spending? So let's look at each of these in a bit more detail, starting with joint accounts. So some couples do decide to combine all of their money and assets and use just joint accounts. So they manage all money jointly, they have full transparency over each other's spending and saving. Of course, this means you don't need to worry about owing each other money or deciding where bills are going to be paid from, because everything is managed as a team. So it's a what's mine is yours sort of arrangement. Now, of course, joint finances will mean joint decisions, and it may also mean in some cases that one of you is actually spending money that your partner has earned. So this doesn't necessarily work for everyone, and it can also become challenging if there are, say, children from previous relationships that you remain financially responsible for. So various things to think about, but some couples do opt to manage everything together using just joint accounts. Now, the middle option would mean you each keep your own sole account, but you also open a joint account, which would generally be used for things like communal expenses and bills. And you might also have a joint savings account as well. Now, there are a few things you'll need to decide on if you do opt for this approach. So first of all, which expenses will come out of the joint account versus which will come from your sole accounts. But also, and we've touched upon this already, how much are you paying into that joint account in the first place? So is that 50-50? Will that be a percentage of your income? So perhaps your contribution into that account is proportionate to your earnings. So various things to think about again. But the third option here is keeping your finances separate using sole accounts only. So they're accounts in your individual names. So this does maintain the most financial independence, but it will require you to agree on who will cover which of your joint expenses. So thinking back to those ground rules we mentioned on the previous slide. And you might also want to think about whether you're still going to discuss larger purchases, even if you are paying for them out of your individual accounts. So obviously 3 broad ideas, and you can probably see that there are lots of nuances with all of these options. And there's no right or wrong answer. And just to give you an idea, according to TSB Bank, 61% of couples have access to a joint account, but 4 in 5 couples do also have a separate personal account. So lots of important considerations to think about and discuss as a couple, but hopefully that gives you an idea of some of those key things to think about. But however you intend to manage your banking and saving arrangements, whether that's jointly or on an individual basis, there are various other areas of personal finance which you might also want to consider as part of these broader discussions. So let's just have a look at some of these. Starting with the first point here on the slide, because it is worthwhile noting that there are certain tax benefits available to married couples and those in civil partnerships. So, for example, if we think about inheritance tax, assets will pass between spouses or civil partners free of inheritance tax if one partner were to pass away. And the other partner would also receive any unused nil rate band and residence nil rate band, which is something that should also be factored into inheritance tax planning. So, worthwhile when thinking about your broader finances, are there any tax benefits available to us as a couple? Now, there are also various allowances which you might be able to claim, and these are, well, a couple of these are marriage allowance and married couples allowance. Now, marriage allowance might allow you to transfer a portion of your personal allowance to the other partner. So that's up to £1,260 of your own personal allowance. Now, married couples allowance is relevant where one partner is born before the 6th of April 1935, so won't necessarily be relevant to everyone, but both of these allowances might allow an opportunity to cut your tax bill if you are eligible. So worthwhile reading more on these. There's a link to the Money Helper website on the slide there, but there's loads more information on the gov.uk website as well, so worthwhile having a look into those. But I do also want to talk a little about pensions, because whilst pensions are sole assets, so assets in individual names, you might still be able to use them strategically as part of your joint financial planning. And an example of this might be paying into your partner's pension, because you will still receive tax relief even if a partner isn't working. So again, worthwhile if one party is perhaps utilising their full pension allowance for a tax year, thinking about actually, does the other partner have any unused allowance that you may be able to work as a couple? So this is about maximising your tax allowances jointly. But I do just want to finish this slide with a reminder, and this is particularly relevant for unmarried couples. And the reminder is that your assets will not automatically pass to your partner if you were to die and are not married or in a civil partnership. And that's true even if you're living with your partner. So it's for this reason that it's really, really important to, first of all, make a will, but also update the nomination of beneficiary forms connected to your pension and any life cover you have. And this will generally ensure that your assets will be directed to the person or people you want them to go to in the event of your death. So some really important calls to action on that slide there. Now, we've obviously just touched upon pensions, but I do just want to expand on this idea and another really important consideration when managing your money as a couple. And this is perhaps particularly relevant where one party within the couple works and one doesn't, or where one perhaps earns significantly more than the other. So you'll see on the slide here that I've included statistics about the gender pension gap, and these were taken from the Now Pensions report of last year. And according to this report, women actually retire with pension savings of around a third of the pension savings that men do. And they would actually have to work for an extra 19 years to achieve an equal sized pension pot. And this is the case for various reasons, including things like the gender pay gap, so where women on average earn less than men. Note that is different to unequal pay, where a woman is paid less than a man for doing the same job, which is illegal. So that's the gender pension gap, but also things like career breaks, lack of financial confidence, the impacts of menopause can also contribute to these gender pay and pension gaps. But let's just take a step back from gender and think about the key message here for couples. And that's true whether you're a heterosexual couple, whether you're a same-sex couple. Because if one partner earns less or takes a career break to, say, look after children or elderly relatives, then you might find that that person has a lower pension saved for retirement. And you might also find that they're entitled to a lower state pension if they haven't been paying sufficient national insurance contributions. So, really important to think about. And I also think it's worth mentioning historical views on money and finance in relationships, which might also come into play here. So, for example, perhaps where one person is seen as the homemaker, one is seen as the breadwinner, or perhaps where one party manages all of the financial affairs. And we definitely do see a generational difference around finances as well. And I was chatting to someone about this recently who said, I don't know what my mum's going to do if something happens to my dad because he handles everything when it comes to money and she doesn't know how much the council tax is. She doesn't know how much bills are or how to pay them. She doesn't even know how to read energy meters. Now, this is a really important point because, again, it's important to try and bridge this gap, whether it's a knowledge gap, whether it's a pension gap, and try think about your finances jointly as a couple and whether there are opportunities to bridge some of these gaps. And there really is no right or wrong way of managing this, your relationship, your lifestyle, but this is just about highlighting these gaps and why it is important to consider the financial impacts. So if one party is going to reduce working hours, what is the impact on their pension? Or if something happened to one of you, how would the other cope financially? And once you've considered some of these impacts, consider then how you can mitigate them. So if we think back to that last slide and using pensions in a strategic way, could a working partner pay into a non-working partner's pension to help boost retirement savings for that individual? Or is there an opportunity to claim a benefit like child benefit to provide a non-working partner with a national insurance credit towards their state pension? So lots of things to think about on this slide, and there will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end, but really important to consider, as I say, these gaps and how you can manage your money as a couple to try and mitigate some of the impacts. But let's just finish up now with 5 top tips for working your money together. So this is that action plan that I mentioned for you to take away and work through following the session. And the first thing to do is simply start. And it really doesn't matter how early you are in your relationship, there's always a conversation to be had around money. Even on your first date, when you decide who's going to pay that bill, it's a really great opportunity to start talking about money and finance. So do consider booking in a money date where you can have this conversation. And if you already speak about money regularly, this is a great chance to continue that conversation. But once you've started the conversation, it's then important to think about a basic budget. So it's about coming together to agree, right, what do we have to spend each month to be able to live? What's nice to have? What are we going to save? And having that conversation together. But you might not immediately agree on everything relating to your budget. So that brings us on to step 3, because you should remember that you don't have to thrash it all out there and then. This is about establishing where you are both at, having a think about it, and then breaking it down into manageable chunks to deal with moving forward. And then point 4, try to keep coming back to the conversation. And it might be worthwhile sitting down, say, twice a year, every year to review everything, because talking about money is really important at every stage. So at the beginning of a relationship, you might need to agree on how you're managing your money. But later on, 1 in 3 marriages do end in divorce. You might find you need to discuss how you separate your finances in a way that's fair. Or as you're nearing retirement, you're likely to have more time, but probably less money. So, what do you do with that time? How do you apportion your money? Do you want to look after the grandkids? Do you want to become members of that golf club you've always wanted to join? So, there are different costs attached to these choices. these stages in life, and it's really important to make sure that you continue to be on the same page. So depending on the stage you're at, ask yourself some of the key questions. Has our mortgage changed? How much am I spending? Who's paying for the holidays? And you might not change anything. You might not change something every time, but it helps keep on the same page and helps you both to understand the balance and keep up to date with everything. But finally, step 5, we've already mentioned that it can be really helpful to agree on what you want to achieve over the next 1, 5, 10 years. And then thinking about how are you going to be able to afford to achieve those goals? And do you agree on what they should be? And if not, can you find a compromise? So consider, if you don't already have some, setting some joint financial goals. If you do already have some, take some time to review them. Are you on track? Is there anything you need to change? Because with all things money related, it's a really dynamic and ongoing process, really important to keep revisiting. And just to finish off on this point, it's also really important to celebrate those financial milestones as well. So if you've saved enough to complete those home renovations, or if you've finally paid off that loan, rather than letting money come between you, really try to create and celebrate these financial milestones. So that brings us to the end of the content, but just like to wrap up by reminding you that you do have some great support accessible to you through the ICE Benevolent Fund and the IMechE Support Network. They're there to help, so please do reach out via the contact details on the slide there. And we have a few minutes left for questions. So Fiona, I will hand back over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Amy. Yes, we have a few questions. Do you have any tips on how to make talking about debt less stressful?
This is a really good one, and this does crop up fairly regularly. And the first thing I would say here is that having debt can be, stressful, isolating at times, and actually trying to deal with it on your own can often make it feel worse. So actually, the first thing I'd say is by sharing your experiences with debt and talking to your partner about it, you can often share the load and actually find a new perspective. So the first tip would be try and start that conversation, because the sooner you start, the easier it will usually be. So try to find some quiet time where you have no plans, nothing else going on, where your sole focus can be having that conversation. And you might want to prepare a few, key points or gather some paperwork to show your partner as part of that conversation. So actually you're going into that feeling well equipped to deal with any questions that might come up. But ultimately, it's about being as open and honest as you can. And in fact, we do often see that people feel closer to their partners after having conversations like these. So hopefully a few tips there to help you get started.
Perfect. Thank you. It kind of leads on to the next question is how do you support my partner if they don't want to talk about money?
Yeah, and another good one. And as we mentioned earlier, we'll just bring this back to that money mindset point. So, money mindset really is a key driver of our behavior. And, that's often a reason why people don't like talking about money, something that perhaps they've experienced in their early childhood or their past money experiences. So, remember, first of all, that if your partner does find it difficult talking about money, this might be down to something that has happened previously. So do try to keep that in mind. Try to be really open and understanding, and perhaps ask them that question, why do you find it hard talking about money, to really help you get under the bonnet and understand why perhaps there's that blocker there. But throughout, just try to keep that conversation really positive, avoiding any sort of blame, and actually try to focus on some really small practical actions you can take to move in the right direction. And it's not about tackling everything at once. These should be regular and ongoing conversations. So perhaps breaking it down into kind of smaller, more manageable chunks can help. But if your partner is still struggling, they might actually want to start by speaking to someone independent. So it might be worth reaching out to an employee assistance program at work, for example. Or there's also an organisation called Relate, and they provide relationship support in England and Wales as well. So various options if actually speaking to someone else might help to get that conversation started.
Fantastic, thank you. I think final question, if that's okay, Amy.
Sure.
My finances are very intertwined with my ex-partner. Will this have an impact on my current partner's finances?
Yeah, it's a good question to end on. And one thing I'd say first of all is it is worth checking your credit report to see if you are still financially linked to your ex-partner in any way. So this might be the case if, say, you had a joint bank account or mortgage or credit card, for example. Now, if you are and you no longer share finances with your ex-partner, then you may want to contact the credit reference agencies directly. So they're Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. They may be able to remove them from your credit report. They will probably need to see proof that you're no longer financially connected. But by doing this, you may be able to move forward then without that ex-partner's financial situation impacting yourself or any new partners. So that's quite hopefully a useful practical step that you can take. So check that credit report and then contact those credit reference agencies.